Welcome back to Monday Musings, a casual conversation about culture and theology. I'm Justin Ely.
And I'm Daniel Chen. We're just a couple guys talking about some stuff.
We just spent the last 30 minutes trying to reconfigure GarageBand because I obsessively deleted every file from my computer last week, including the template we used to record these podcasts.
Yeah, and it's funny, you might be like, you guys record this on GarageBand? And the answer is yes, because this is as advanced as we know how to go for this podcast.
I was listening to another podcast the other day, and at the end they were like, our editors are blah, blah, blah. I'm like, editors? We're the writers, producers, editors.
I know, maybe we need to start taking donations or something so we can hire an editor.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Or just someone who doesn't delete all their files. That would be a start, apparently. Well, welcome back to Monday Musings. We're glad to have you with us. We took a week off in preparation for what we're going to do this week. We're continuing our series on a biblical theology of race. And today we're going to be taking all that we've learned and talked about and using it as a critique of Christian nationalism. Ooh.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like, when we're about to talk about Christian nationalism and CRT.
Yeah, CRT
for like your average Joe. You think people know what these terms even are or have heard of it? Like, where do you think the average person like lands on this? Like in terms of knowing what it is?
I think average Joe, maybe not on Christian nationalism, but probably on CRT, just because both left and right media are really covering that right now, and like fights are breaking out on school board meetings. So that would be my guess.
And I'd be curious too. Like, I'm thinking, we've talked about the illusion of explanatory depth, where I've talked about this before, where people think they know how to explain it better than they actually do.
Right.
But if like 0 is like, I know what Christian nationalism or CRT are, but 0 is, but I really don't know anything about it. And 10 is like, I'm an expert on the issue.
Right.
An actual expert. Where do you think most people fall? Like, are they 5, 3, 7?
On CRT and Christian nationalism?
Yeah. I'm just curious.
Maybe 5.
You think?
Average people? You think less?
I think probably less.
Maybe 3, 3.5?
Like, I feel like
3.72.
I feel like me and you, like
141529.
I feel like me and you have done a lot of study on this.
Yep.
And we're like 6s.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Because like
right.
we don't have any formal academic training on any of this stuff.
I mean, I think it's a good reminder that like most of the things the like media tells us we need to be like devoting our lives to, most people are like, yeah, but I kind of want to watch the football game today.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like, I have a life. Like, I'm
right.
I don't have time to be like enraged all the time.
Right.
But that's what we're here to help you do. Get enough information to where you can be adequately enraged at your world. So that's our hope with Christian nationalism today. But as always, we have to begin with the life hack.
So our life hack today is something that Jason Cole, which is a member at our church and a good friend of ours. So I have like back and neck issues.
Right.
And so, I do a lot of things. I go chiropractor at times. I do like the Chinese cupping stuff. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I'll get like knots that like makes it painful for me to turn my neck. It's rare, but when it does, it's pretty painful. It's like if you sleep wrong, that kind of idea. Apparently, you can get something called a muscle hook.
A muscle hook?
Yeah, and it's just like this big plastic thing with like a bunch of different like nubs on it. And basically, each of the nubs you like can use on a different muscle. But like if you have like a neck problem, you basically can, like massage, like if you like press down hard enough, it like releases the tension.
Right.
It's essentially that, but you can do it to yourself. You don't need like someone to do it for you. And I bought one, and it's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
You can do it like on your back?
Yeah. And so like, for example, like when I have like a knot, a lot of times what I'll do at home is I'll have my wife like dig her elbow into that knot.
Work it out.
Work it out. And now I have the muscle hook, and the muscle hook will do it for me. And I can put the thing about that is I can't if I get my wife to do it, I can't control how hard she does it. So if she does it too soft or too hard, it's like sometimes she doesn't, and I'm like, because like she doesn't know how painful it is,
Right.
you know. But the muscle hook, you can like,
You just know.
yeah, you can press it in yourself, and it's been really helpful.
Where do you get this muscle hook? Amazon?
Amazon. I got it from Amazon. I think he got his from Target. Jason did.
Is it called the muscle hook?
No, what this one is called like Build Back Better. No, that's
Build
no,
your
it's
back
really
better.
called something. It has build and back in it somewhere. If you don't know, Build Back Better is Biden's
Joe Biden.
plan. And
Man, he's really stuck with that too. That was like, I just have to feel like this is partisanship aside. I have to feel like the day that was discussed in a campaign meeting and accepted, the guy who came up with it had to be like, "Oh, I was just joking. I didn't actually mean that to be a legitimate slogan." And it stuck, and here we are. Build back better.
Yeah,
build
but
your back better. With
anyways,
the muscle hook.
I don't know what it's actually called, I guess, but I typed in muscle hook, and
Okay.
it got me where I needed to go online. So
There you go. Great life hack of the week.
yeah.
All right, and now it's time to go to our listener of the month.
Our listener of the month this week is Josh Coberly.
Josh Coberly.
And Josh Coberly is, I'm just so thankful for Josh
Me
because he probably has the best attitude of anyone I've ever met.
Incredible attitude.
He's just incredible attitude.
Yeah.
Like, he's so encouraging.
Yeah.
And, but also part of what I'm talking about is not even related to church stuff, but I watch, he'll like post stuff online and, I'm guessing it's his friends like post these like remarks and stuff on some of his posts sometimes. And that guy handles it with such grace.
He does.
And
he like promotes other people really well.
he does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyways, Josh is our listener of the month. He's a faithful listener.
Last week when we were off, I got a text from him that was like, "Hey, is there a podcast this week?"
I'm like,
I
sorry,
was like,
man.
"No, but thanks for listening."
Thanks for listening. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why he is. And so he's married. He's got 2 wonderful kids. He's a great dad. So we're thankful for you, Josh.
Yeah, Josh, thank you. Thank you. All right, so we're going to get into it. We've been talking about a biblical theology on race. If you've missed it, I'd encourage you to catch up. We've really laid a good foundation, and now we want to apply that to some issues of the day, and we're going to use biblical theology on race to critique what's called Christian nationalism.
And I would say at first, when did you first start hearing about this term? I think for me, it became like blown up on in my like social media world after January 6th.
I feel like I started hearing about it more with the Trump era.
Okay.
Like 2016 and before. I felt like there was starting to be, I remember reading an article, I don't know how many years ago, that older generation Christians in America tend to equate America with Jerusalem, and younger generations tend to equate America with Babylon. So I remember years ago reading that article and seeing that to be true to my experience and thinking, that's interesting. That kind of explains why younger generations kind of cringe at like the patriotic July 4th worship services.
Right.
And older generations like love that.
Right.
So I think that's when, and I don't know if the term was used, but it was several years ago that was brought up.
Interesting.
But for you, it was just January 6th, probably.
I had heard the term before that, but I didn't feel like that many people were talking about it. I felt like, honestly, I'm not even sure if this is a huge term in like secular culture, like broadly. I mean, a little bit.
It is. I mean,
I hear it more in terms of almost like Christian infighting.
right, kind of internal squabbles.
Yeah, that's how I have most interacted. I say interacted in the sense, I mean, I'm like a silent observer on social media, so I don't really interact. But like when I see people interact on my Facebook and Twitter and stuff, it's usually between Christians. I usually don't see Christian nationalism as like, I feel like CRT and Christian nationalism are kind of like things used to bludgeon the other side with, it's just like point the finger. I don't really see my non-Christian friends talk about Christian nationalism a ton. Maybe the concept, but not the term.
I've actually, I've seen a fair amount of it in each morning I like to read bits of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal just to get different perspectives on things. And throughout like the Trump presidency, I feel like that's something that's been brought up.
The term?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I've seen the idea more, but not necessarily the term.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen the term a fair amount in a fair amount of things.
Yeah, I mean, you read more than I do, so.
But we want to start with what it's not, but is often accused of, and that is like healthy patriotism. I think we really need to. I think we don't have like a good balance, especially in like Christian culture right now in America, for like what healthy patriotism looks like. So I think we tend toward extremes.
Yep.
And we tend toward either idolizing the nation we live in or demonizing it. But there is like this healthy middle of like healthy patriotism. So we wanted to start out.
It's if that. You ain't first, you're last kind of idea, right? It's like, we've seen kind of like what I call crazy patriotism, and so in order to avoid that, let's have no patriotism, and that's not the answer, right? So like, yeah, and so
just a few thoughts on like what healthy patriotism could look like. One is obviously submission to the government. I mean, Paul says this in Romans 13, let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. So submission to the government, like, that's a good thing. So
yeah. Like we would say disobeying the government for the sake of disobeying government is bad.
Right.
Anarchy is also bad.
Yeah. There is obviously like a line that the government can cross. So for example, like early Christians in the early Roman Empire were worshiping in violation to the laws. But Christians would say, no,
Caesar was God,
over.
essentially. Yeah.
You don't have the right the government doesn't have the right to demand worship, so we will violate that.
Right.
So it's not that.
If the worldly government doesn't violate God's laws, then we don't violate the worldly government, right? So it's in that order, right?
Yeah.
We would say God is still the
second.
Yeah, God is still the overarching. So,
So Christian nationalism is not submission to the government. It's not being grateful to be able to live a quiet and peaceable life. So in 1 Timothy chapter 2, this is what Paul talks about. He says, 1 Timothy 2:1, first of all, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving may be made for all people, for kings and for all who are in high positions, that we may live a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. So we have so many blessings in this country. One of them is that we can be left alone to live a quiet and peaceful life, and being grateful for that, appreciative of that, patriotic that is an option in this country, where it is not in so many Christians in so many countries around the world don't have the opportunity to live a quiet and peaceful life. That's a huge blessing.
Yeah, and I would say even more broadly than that, like, it's okay to like to live here. Right. I think it's so funny. People always talk about idealized versions of other countries. And I've traveled all over the world, and I know you've traveled a lot of places too. I'm like, have you been to other places? Like America is great. It's great to live here.
Right.
Like the fact that we are able to, if you have the freedom to hate living here,
that's pretty amazing.
And hold that, and the government not come and
like,
throw you in gulags, like that's a good thing.
Right.
Like you can hold that if you want. I just...
be grateful that you can hate living here.
Yeah, it is funny though. Like I was talking to a friend last week, and like China has decided that the whole country, you can only play video games from Friday from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. or something like that.
Naturally.
And that's it.
Yep.
And they control when your internet usage and stuff is like,
Right.
I'm like, it's pretty great here.
Yeah. So I mean, and I think sometimes it's strange, like in this whole America certainly has warts, and we have,
for
we
sure.
have that stuff, but at the same time, there's some incredible blessings to living here that I feel like lately have been to highlight those blessings, to enjoy those blessings, to be grateful for those blessings. Somehow is like accused of Christian nationalism.
Yeah,
and we just
for
want
sure.
to say no.
No. Like you can, yeah.
Related to that, grateful to worship freely, and for those who have sacrificed for that freedom.
Yeah.
We can get into a whole thing. We do have a little bit of a deification of the American military. We'll kind of get into that in a minute. But it is no small thing that men and women over the years of our country have paid a great debt and some the ultimate sacrifice to be able to enable us to live in this country that we do enjoy these freedoms. And that's no small thing.
Yeah, and I would say, going back to a comment you made about the older generation thinking we're Jerusalem, meaning that, like, I feel like sometimes where it kind of tips into Christian nationalism is when you start thinking like God loves the U.S. more than
Yes.
the rest of the world.
Yes.
That's not what we're saying.
Yeah.
But we're saying, like, if persecution comes, I hope, like, me and you have talked about this and thought about this, like we would still be pastors, but I'm thankful that I get to pastor and not be persecuted, and have like the government or our neighbors trying to I just think of, for example, Afghanistan, what's happening over there now, like Christians are being hunted.
Yeah.
If one day we are hunted for being Christians, I would hope we would continue to lead and to love and to shepherd Christians. But I'm right now thankful that we're not being hunted.
Yeah.
So
I think another thing Christian nationalism is being grateful for the system of government that has given you opportunity. And I think this one's important because, like we've said, it's not perfect here. Like, we got problems like every country because people are involved.
Yeah.
So, right, that there are broken things and broken systems, but we do have a system of government that it enables you to try, to experiment, to succeed, and I think it's wrong to demonize our country and at the same time reap the blessings from how the country is set up. So again, nothing wrong with critiquing, nothing wrong with challenging, protesting, advocating. Like, all those things are actually very American.
right.
But I think just being like, I'm grateful for the capitalistic form of government that we live in that enables. I mean, I just think of so many of our like church members, for example, that have benefited greatly from capitalism in their own personal workplaces,
Right.
and have been very generous to the work of the Lord in our local church, to giving to that. So I'm grateful that we live in the type of country that enables that versus like a communistic form of government that strips wealth production from people.
Right.
So that doesn't make you a Christian nationalist.
Yeah, and I would say it's funny because I think in all this, what I think we want you to hear is like, you're a citizen of God's kingdom first, and then you're a citizen of whatever nation you're part of second. And I'm like, if you love being British, you can be a Christian and love being British. That's
Right.
That's great.
Right.
Or
And we love your accent.
Or yeah,
So we love it too.
just pick any country,
Yeah.
and if you're like, I really love
Yeah.
being
Praise
part
God.
of this country,
Praise God.
like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, you're part of God's kingdom
Right,
first.
that should
As
be
long as
first.
we agree on that.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Be British.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I'd add is kind of the last thing, what it's not. It's also not like seeing the sovereign hand of God on our country and being in awe of that, right? Like, now America's not Israel. We'll get into that in a minute. But nevertheless, like the formation of the Constitution is incredible.
Yeah.
Like that this document was able to be produced, and it's incredibly fallible. I mean, it accounted for African Americans as 3/5 of a person in the census. I mean, there were some huge flaws, but at the same time, written into the Constitution was a way to remedy those flaws. I mean, it's an incredible document. There's nothing wrong with thanking God and being in awe that God would use, honestly, a bunch of like deistic, they're not really Christians, but established a pretty incredible form of government. And looking back like in the 20th century and seeing how America was used to push back fascism of Nazi Germany and the communism of the Soviet Union, that's incredible. And so looking back and being in awe of God's sovereign hand on our country, and not trying to excuse the flaws. I mean, we'll get to that in a minute. There are plenty of really bad things that our country has done that you don't have to lie about. Like you don't have to pretend they're not there.
Right.
But you also don't have to pretend the great things aren't there too.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, I mean, we've set this theme, and we'll continue to do so as long as this podcast is around. But I'm proud to be American. I'm proud to live in this country.
Yep.
But that's not my core identity.
Right.
And I think that's like
Yeah.
a clear line we can draw, right?
Right.
Is when it does become your identity of like...
That's a problem.
Yeah.
So we've talked about what Christian nationalism is not. So let's talk about what Christian nationalism is. And to define this, we're going to be using Tim Keller's book review of Andrew Whitehead's book, Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. So we're like 3 levels removed from the primary source.
Yeah.
We are quoting someone who is quoting the primary source.
Nice. Yeah.
We do our research.
And so when you go tell your friends what you learned here today...
You're a quartary source.
Is that really what it's called?
Quattro. I don't know.
I have no idea.
You're 4th degree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what Keller says, Perry and Whitehead say, they identify and define Christian nationalism on 3 levels. They say first, it's a fusion of the American identity with Christianity, preferably Protestant, with race, preferably white, with nativity, born in the United States, and with political ideology, social and fiscal conservatism. So what they're saying Christian nationalism is first, it's taking, Christianity means that you're American. American means that you're a Protestant, white, born in the United States, social and fiscal conservative. So it's fusing those 2 identities together to where Christianity and these other things aren't separated in the mind of a Christian nationalist. Second part of the definition they give is that it has a particular understanding of American history. So in a Christian nationalist perspective, the United States was established as a specifically Christian nation, and it almost has like a covenantal relationship with God. Like Israel had a special relationship with God, America has a special covenantal relationship with God. And today what we'd say is the threat to that relationship comes from the left and non-believers trying to turn America into a secular, woke, relativistic nation. And so you hear a lot of times in kind of this Christian nationalism speak, unless we turn back to God, he's going to remove his blessing from us, right? So we don't turn back. What's funny is we never really define when that back was.
I know.
Right, but it's always turned back.
Right.
As if we had it at one point in time, but we don't now.
Right.
Kind of Christian nationalism understanding. And the third part, they note that Christian nationalism is implicitly and sometimes explicitly committed to a specific kind of social hierarchy. So you have like native born over foreigners, men over women, Christian over Jews and Muslims, whites over non-whites. And so there's a specific hierarchy and structure to society. So that's Keller's review of Whitehead and Perry's book, Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. 3 levels. So that's what Christian nationalism is. So it's a fusion of American identity with Christianity. It's a particular understanding of American history. Almost, we are the new Israel. We are God's hope for the world. We're in a covenantal relationship with God. And it's a hierarchy of certain types of people above other types of people. Thoughts on that definition?
Yeah, I think definitions are super important because is this how everyone defines Christian nationalism?
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not. And so I think this is a good definition for sure.
Yeah.
And I think what strikes me about this too, it's funny because I'm like, did the Christian nationalists come up with this? Or it kind of seems like, as we talk about CRT folks, or CRT next week, it feels like this is like the perfect poster child of what the quote unquote left is against. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
This is like an ideal, like if like the liberal culture hates, if there's like a, personification of what we should hate, it's like the Christian nationalist. And I'm like, man, that seems very on point of what people are trying to tear down. But yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think definitions are helpful, and that's why we wanted to say what it's not to begin with. And according to this definition, we're going to offer a critique.
Yeah.
We're not critiquing another definition. We're critiquing. Yeah,
let's be clear on that. Yeah.
I think it is helpful maybe to see 2 different examples of Christian nationalism at play. And as always on the Monday Musing podcast, we like to punch left and punch right at the same time. So President Joe Biden was largely criticized several weeks ago when he gave speech after the 13 service members were killed on the evacuation of Afghanistan. And he evoked a Christian nationalism theme in his speech, and this is what he said. President Joe Biden said, "American military has been answering for a long time. Here I am, Lord, send me. Each one of these women and men of our armed forces are the heirs of that tradition of sacrifice, of volunteering to go into harm's way, to risk everything, not for glory, not for profit, but to defend what we love and the people we love." That was President Biden evoking Isaiah chapter 6, where God calls Isaiah to a specific mission, and Isaiah says, "Here am I, Lord, send me." And Joe Biden takes that and transcribes it onto the American military, thus making the American military the force to accomplish God's mission in the world. That's straight up Christian nationalism. That takes the American identity and fuses it with a Christian identity, and is wrong.
And what's interesting here, and we're about to give a conservative example too, but what's interesting here is you have, one of this definition is the political ideology, but you can see it on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
Right? That you can do this no matter who it is, right? Yeah. And I would say the majority of what people think Christian nationalism is this definition, but there's definitely a spectrum where you could kind of fall into this category and not, I'm looking at the Christian, preferably Protestant, race white, natively born in the U.S., or political ideology, social and fiscal conservatism. You can not have one of those and still be a Christian nationalist.
Right. Right. It's not 100 out of 100%.
Right.
Yeah. So an example on the right, and honestly, I don't know which one of these was more painful. I watched both of them, and it was like fingernails on the chalkboard. Mike Pence who I would point out I really admire in a lot of ways. At the RNC, his vice presidential nomination speech this past year, it was a painful moment of Christian nationalism where toward the end of his speech, he said, so let's run the race marked out for us. So he's alluding to Hebrews 12, 1 through 2, which says, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. That's what Hebrews 12 said. So Pence goes, he's concluding the speech, let us run the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on old glory. And all she represents. Let us fix our eyes on this land of heroes and let their courage inspire. To his credit, later he does go on to say, let us fix our eyes on the author and perfecter of our faith and freedom, and never forget where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. But Mike Pence straight up substituted old glory for Jesus.
I
Painful.
think Pence's was worst.
I think
personally,
so too.
Mainly because
Don't mess with Jesus.
don't mess with Jesus. But also, I really, we don't know these people individually, and
No.
we're not judges of people's salvation. Yeah. But Pence does seem to be a believer.
Yeah.
And if you're like, what about Biden? Well, I'm like, man, even the Catholic Church is trying to disown him. So I'm just saying, like, he's done. If you look at the fruit of their life,
right?
I think, at least in my opinion, Pence is more clear. Like, I would say, he actually seems like
a Christian,
a Christian, and to me, that's worse. Because if Biden is a Christian, then that's equally bad. But if Biden's not a Christian, like not actually submitted to Jesus as Lord, then I'm like, well, non-Christian misinterpreting Scripture is par for the course.
Right.
A Christian,
it's like, ooh.
Substituting Jesus for old glory is like, that's real bad.
Yeah. So again, I think one of the clearest things we see to spot Christian nationalism is when you begin to fuse America with Christianity, and they begin to mean the same thing.
Right.
And the mission and glory of America is tied to the mission and glory of God's purposes on the earth.
Right.
And that's what Pence kind of did. Let us fix our eyes on all glory. No, I'll pledge allegiance to old glory. I'll, wave the flag, but I've fixed my eyes on Jesus.
Right.
So two kind of examples of Christian nationalism from the left and from the right. So now what we want to do is actually offer a critique. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the kind of material we've used up to this point to critique it. So we're going to use the doctrine of creation, fall, redemption, restoration to critique this definition of Christian nationalism. And we're going to do the same for CRT next week. So first, the doctrine of creation would teach us that Christian nationalism misses God's focus on the world by making America the centerpiece. So essentially what Christian nationalism does is kind of say and on the sixth day, God made America. Right, but God didn't make America on the sixth day. He made man on the sixth day.
Right.
And from Adam comes every nation on the earth. So America's great, America's wonderful. The world has been around for a long time, and America hasn't been around that long.
Right.
So there's more to the creation of the world than America. That'd be the first piece of critique.
Yeah, and definitely. And I think, Christian nationalists think America is the center of God's plans.
Right.
Right. And to your point, America's been around for what,
200 plus.
I'm we're talking 15% of just AD or BCE. I'm you're not even talking. I'm talking about just this common era of history.
Yeah,
I'm
245 years. Yeah.
I'm you're talking 15%. I'm
tiny.
America's not even the central role of since Jesus' resurrection in terms of the history of time. You know what I mean?
I think the book of Judges
lasts
longer than American history.
Yeah.
It's like one book in the Old Testament.
Yeah, we forget that. And also even to think too, I think this is a misconception because we were viewed, and I think Americans viewed America as a quote unquote Christian nation for so long.
Right.
I wouldn't even say we're like a Christian nation, if that makes sense. And what you see is like the fastest growing places where people are coming to faith is not the U.S. I think that's like it's like important for us as Christians in America to understand that.
Yeah.
Right? Like China is exploding.
Right.
Same with Africa, the Middle East.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. So that's doctrine of creation. Second, doctrine of the fall. I think this is a pretty big one. It refuses to acknowledge the sins of our founders and past. I think this is something we're really struggling to figure out. Like, it almost seems like those who love America and want to be patriotic feel like they have to, in order to love America, be patriotic, almost like ignore the sins of the founders and ignore some of the really horrible things we've done in our history. And the people who seem to love hating America only want to talk about those things. But the doctrine of the fall says, like, we are sinful human beings. So we should expect sin to show up everywhere. And because sinful people make systems, we should expect some degree of systemic sin to show up in our organizations. So you don't have to, like, the doctrine of the fall teaches us you don't have to hide the sins of our founders or try to cover up the sins of the past of America. You can still love your country and be very realistic about some of the horrific falls of it.
You know what a great example of that is? Today's Columbus Day.
Yep.
And Columbus is one of these figures that recently it's been really popular to basically say Columbus is Satan and there's not anything good that he did or came out. And I think you have people, I watched this video yesterday that was just basically like, Columbus is a heroic giant that, is so great and all this stuff. And then you have the other side that's like, Columbus is, once again, the devil or whatever.
Right.
And I'm like,
neither. He's a human being.
Yeah.
Who did some great things and some really horrible things.
Yep. He did some great things and horrible things. And I'll give, for example, like, some of the horrible things that he's done is like brought diseases and wiped out a lot of the population here. That's horrific and terrible.
Yeah.
But part of it too that we got to remember is you don't have the ability to hate Columbus here in the U.S. without him. I mean, think about right. Think about that.
All right.
Right. And so to say like once again, the freedoms that we have here largely rests on his shoulders as well.
Right.
We can't just like throw that away and discount that.
Yeah.
It's basically, I mean, similar to saying like, well, I didn't need my parents to birth me. I didn't need my mom to birth me. I could have done it all myself. Right. Like what? That makes no sense. Like you're only here because you're because of your parents.
Yeah.
And like whether you have good parents or bad parents, you're here because your parents existed. And we're here because of what Columbus did. And once again, I don't want to discount the horrible things that he did.
Yeah.
But he did a lot of great things too. And here's something I'll say that I think is helpful. We cannot judge history based on current cultural worldviews. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because like, guess what? Things that were going on 600 years ago, very different than now.
Yep.
Like the way the world was viewed.
Yep.
Right. And so like, if we're going to judge people into history, I think it's fair to point out the wrongs. Mm-hmm. Right. But to say like, it's like to be understandable to say how people could have ended up with their conclusions. Maybe.
Yeah. But I think Christian nationalism, by and large, refuses to acknowledge the sins of the founders. So that's what we're critiquing
Agree.
now, right? So Columbus Day becomes this day to celebrate the greatest man that ever lived, and we celebrate many of our presidents on President's Day, and we don't talk about how they owned slaves.
Yeah.
And we don't like even Christians, like we idolize people like Jonathan Edwards and don't take time to like, okay, he owned slaves. What does that mean? Like, how do I reconcile that with Scripture? We deify these people, but the doctrine of the fall says we're all sinners, and so we don't have to hide that. We can acknowledge that. So creation, fall. Third is redemption. The critique we have on Christian nationalism related to the doctrine of redemption is that it replaces the church as God's vehicle to transform society with America.
Yeah.
And whether that be, as Joe Biden put it, like the American military,
Right.
many times this Christian nationalism vision has been the American military is spreading the glory of God abroad, which is a really dangerous concept.
And I would put in too, like the view of the government is like Christian nationalists would say, like America is the promised land, and the promised land is screwed if we have the wrong politician in there.
Yep.
And I would say, well, no, you know,
Right.
like how small of a view of God is that?
Right.
You know,
Right.
where God can't accomplish his works because of one person in the White House.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think I think what we do here too is like Christian nationalism would say, on one side you have this kind of military vision of it, and on another side you have this moral, like legislating morality kind of side.
Yeah.
And like if we don't overturn X, Y, and Z, and if we don't legislate A, B, and C,
Right.
then God is going to destroy our country.
Right.
And like the hope of the world is gone if we don't. So you have this kind of legislative push, which ironically, I would say the rights, the right in the United States, their kind of tendency toward Christian nationalism would be specific legislation of personal morality.
Right.
Which I would say some is very fair.
Right.
You know? So I'm not saying all of it's wrong, because in a pluralistic society like we have, you have to take your beliefs to the public square and advocate for legislation based on your beliefs. So that, you know, but I'd say a certain level of like, almost like we want the Ten Commandments enshrined, and we want like Christianity and Christian values taught.
Right.
Like publicly. That would be kind of the right's version. I'd say the left's version of it would be taking biblical commands meant for personal charity and forcing it on people in a public sense. And I've heard people on the left go to like Matthew 25 to advocate for like social welfare programs. That Matthew 25 is talking to believers voluntarily giving of themselves to care for other believers. It's not a medicine for the government.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, again, I think typically, like in today's age, we tend to think of Christian nationalism as a problem on the right. It's not only the right, it's also the left. And I'd say that we take what the church should be doing, what the church should be about, redemption, proclaiming the gospel, and we make that the cause of the government. And I think that's where it misses the doctrine of redemption.
Yeah, and I think it's subtle, right? I think this is where it gets confusing, because as a Christian, you should want God's will to be done in our country.
Yes.
Right? And so you should want the right policies. You should want the right social things. But there's a big difference between, I guess, putting your hope in God and putting your hope in the politician or the policy, or, you know, and then using the Bible as like a bludgeon for your cause instead of the context in which it was written to bring glory to God.
Yeah.
Right.
So like, I'll just give two personal examples of where I'm at. Like, I absolutely think a Christian morality on abortion should be legislated, because I think the government's basic responsibility is to protect its citizens. And I believe abortion is murder.
Right.
So, yes, I want that enshrined into U.S. law. Absolutely.
Right.
Do I think you shall have no other gods before me? Do I want that enshrined in U.S. law? No, I don't. I don't want the government deciding doctrine. I want you to let me worship freely, and I want you to let the Muslims worship freely, and I believe the gospel wins. So give me an environment to preach the gospel.
Right.
And
yeah, we're not a theocracy. We're
Right.
not, yeah.
Other side, on the left, about poverty, I think there are plenty of proverbs and psalms that talk about a nation's responsibility toward its poor. So I think there's plenty to be said about trying to find ways to legislate to help lift people out of poverty and to help create a culture and a country where the poor are taken care of. I just think you have to be very careful. That's not a straight line from a text to a specific policy.
Right.
And you have to be careful that God told me that this welfare program is scriptural.
Right.
That becomes kind of Christian nationalism to me.
Right.
So, Doctrine of Redemption. So, it seemed creation, fall, redemption, and then finally restoration. Christian nationalism, according to this definition that we've been looking at, replaces the vision we have at the end of Revelation of every tribe, tongue, language, and nation. It replaces that glorious multinational picture with native-born white American males. And it makes our hope for the future on passing specific laws rather than on the return of Christ. And we've kind of alluded to this a little bit, right? Is like, if these laws aren't passed, then we're all screwed.
Right.
Well, Jesus' return is what we need to wait for.
Yeah. Yeah. He's our hope.
It's funny to me too that we're just so myopic in America that whenever there's problems in America, we assume it's like code talk for the book of Revelation that the end is near.
Right.
And I'm like, well, what about some things in other countries are going really well? Why is it America that's like
right
the ticking time bomb for the book of Revelation to unload? So we tend to, in Christian nationalism, our hope seems to be in America being this perfect shining city on a hill instead of Jesus returning, which is a good corrective.
Yeah, and it seems like what Christian nationalists tend to do is, for the Christian, Christ is the end goal. God's the end goal.
Yep.
Being with God in eternity is the end goal.
Yeah.
And I guess where you can find the difference between a Christian who is nationalistic, right, who is proud to be part of their nation, and a Christian nationalist is the Christian nationalist uses the Bible to fuel their agenda towards an end goal of great America, whereas a Christian lives out what we see in Scripture for the end goal of a great and glorious God.
That's good.
Right?
That's good. And I think that's a good spot to end it on. So that's our critique on Christian nationalism. Lord willing, we'll be back next week with a critique on CRT.
Yeah, This should be fun. Anyways, a spoiler for both. I'm sorry. Spoiler for if I could summarize this one, don't be a Christian nationalist. Be a Christian.
Yeah.
Be a Christian. Be proud of you're part of God's kingdom.
Yeah.
And if you want to be proud to be in this country or any country that you're part of, do it.
Go for it.
But secondarily.
Yeah. It's good. All right. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks.